Justin, thanks for taking the time to join us today. We have some more topics to hit that we were unable to the last time we spoke. Let's start talking about the national debt and the reoccurring budget deficit. Republicans, they run on fiscal responsibility frequently, but the deficit typically remains and the national debt increases. How can you and how will you enact meaningful change when it comes to our spending and the debt crisis?
When I look at the debt situation, again, you just pointed out, Republicans constantly run on the fact that we're going to take a look at government spending. We're going to crack down on it, especially in 2024. We talked about the Doge movement, and we were going to get people in there to really hammer down on the waste, fraud, and abuse that happens every cycle. And when you get excited about that because you're like, yes, finally, we're going to get on track. Because you see it. People see the waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere. The normal everyday person looks at individuals who are abusing systems, or they look at how much money the government spends on some ridiculous things, and they get upset and angry because they're like, this is our tax dollars that's being wasted. Why is this allowed to happen? People feel as though they're being taken advantage of, especially in communities like ours where people are really struggling to make ends meet. And when you elect individuals to be fiscally conservative or fiscally responsible, you get to a point where over and over again you see the same promises essentially get eradicated or left behind. And when we're in this situation, I step in, I'm like, why can't we have a balanced budget? I remember the late 90s. For people who don't know, who are listening to your show, the last time that we had a balanced budget was 2000. So we've gone now in deficit spending for 26 years straight. And before that, so 96 to 2000, we had a balanced budget. But before that, I think it was 20 years or something, we hadn't had one. So spending is one of those things. I joke about it, but there is some sincerity behind it. I say if you were taxed 100%, the government would spend 110%. It just seems like that's the cycle that we live in. So you're trying to hold people accountable. Elected officials keep saying, oh, it's tough. You don't understand. We're spending money because we have these programs and we need them. They're essential. And people are feeling the pain now. You continue to spend and spend and spend, and we call it kicking the can down the road. We've heard that term a million times. It's really impacting our economy. It's taking its toll on inflationary factors, and it's devaluing the dollar. And all those things are not good for the everyday average American citizen who's trying to make ends meet. For me, I don't see why you would vote for deficit spending. Now, I understand the argument. People are going to say, you're stupid for saying that, Justin. You don't understand. But I do. I mean, you can't continuously run a small business in the hole, or as a person out there, I can't. If I have negative $40 in my checking account and I go to get a loan from the bank's going to say, I'm sorry, you don't have available credit, or we can't give you or loan you credit because we just don't feel like you're too high risk. And you're starting to see that. Our credit score as a nation has dropped. And people may or may not understand that our entire financial system is based off of trust. And if we continuously spend and put ourselves in a bad spot, not only globally are people going to be concerned with the U.S. dollar and stability of the dollar moving forward, which you see countries de-dollarizing. People who have been our allies, who have held U.S. dollars globally, have now started to spend dollars at rates that has never been seen before. And that's not because they're trying to invest. They're trying to get rid of U.S. dollars. And so you're seeing the trust in the U.S. dollar in our financial system be eroded because of decisions being made in Washington, D.C. And nobody, Republican or Democrat, has come out and said, this is our plan to stop this. They'll sprinkle in some fairy dust here and there and try to make you feel good and say, we're going to work on the budget. But the reality is no one has the courage. And those who do get primaried and get kicked out, or they're considered to be treasonous or a target. No one seems to have the courage to want to stand up and say, it's going to be painful, but here's the process that needs to take place in order for us to get back on track financially here in the United States and in our federal government.
What's your stance on term limits for members of Congress?
Well, personally, I feel like term limits are essential. We have term limits in the state of Michigan. I think it's effective. One of the problems that you have with term limits is, or the idea of term limits or implementing term limits at the federal level, is there are so many corporations, PACs, special interest groups, foreign entities that are investing a lot of money in legislators. And people typically don't understand that the reason that these groups invest in legislators is because legislators essentially create law. And if you're a corporation and you can't have a monopoly because the government can come after you, you can definitely persuade politicians to write laws or legislation that give you a competitive advantage against small business owners or anyone that might be creeping in on your industry. And that happens continuously over and over and over again. And I tell people it's a slow bleed. You know, they don't go straight for the jugular on small businesses, but they'll do it through small legislative packages that give these large corporations competitive advantages. And one of those competitive advantages may be tax breaks, for example. So when you're heavily invested in politicians or a single politician, you don't want them to leave because it's expensive. And if the new guy comes in, maybe he doesn't want to play by the same rules. So it's going to be even more money for you to persuade them to vote the way that you want them to vote. And there's a lot of different special interest groups and a lot of different things, and legislators write a lot of different bills that go to the floor, get passed. But there's a lot of money in politics, and that's a problem. And that's what's stopping or hindering people from wanting to sign on to change the Constitution or to say we're going to have term limits. It's essential, I think, for long-term viability in the U.S. government to have term limits. And the reason I say that is this. You people use the term career politicians. It's become a career because it's lucrative. No one in their right mind wants to work 7 days a week for 365 days a year for $174,000, where you have to maintain residency in two places, essentially. Washington, D.C., 4 days out of the week, 3 days in your district. Washington, D.C. is one of the most expensive places to get an apartment or get a house. And traveling back and forth, not being able to spend time with your family, the cost-benefit analysis, people say, well, that's a lot of money, $174,000. But the cost-benefit analysis to be in Washington, D.C. and maintain a residency in Michigan, especially in our congressional district, which is the largest congressional district this side of the Mississippi, it's the time cost-benefit analysis just isn't there. But when you go to Washington, D.C. and you meet with these people, and they're constantly coming in and saying, hey, we'll go out to dinner, we'll donate to your campaign, or we'll donate to you, or there's extra perks that you get from what they consider to be insider trading, it becomes lucrative for career politicians. And you've seen politicians who've been in office, being in public service for 40 years, and you're trying to calculate how they were able to survive on their salary, plus they make millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in public service. And that's a problem. And if we don't find a way to curb that through having term limits, then people are going to have less trust in the federal government. They're going to feel, even if it's not true, they're going to feel that the government is corrupt or politicians are corrupt. And that strains our ability to be effective as good politicians or as people who are trying to make a difference in the federal government, just because people are going to look at politicians as being corrupted by money or influenced by money, and that doesn't benefit them.
Immigration remains a hot-button topic, and while most of it is focused on the southern border, the district you're running in is a border district. What do you make of the methods the Trump administration is using to enforce immigration law? What is your thoughts on ICE and Border Patrol, and your thoughts on deportations?
Well, I think that Trump has done a decent job of getting the border closed. The concern of having mass immigration issues, people leaving their country in droves to come into the United States. That was a really significant problem. If you talk to anyone that runs any corporations outside of the United States in Central and South America, we're talking population decline in certain areas like Nicaragua. Up to 30% of their able-bodied workers left the country for the United States of America under the Biden administration. That's a problem, right? So Trump's done a very good job of closing the border. One of the concerns that I have is in our district, we have a lot of H-2A and H-2B visa workers, especially for seasonal stuff. And so for those who don't understand, H-2A is agriculture visas. H-2Bs are more often used for agriculture to fill voids in tourist-based industries. We have Mackinac Island, Mackinac City, St. Ignace, the Boyne Falls area for Boyne Mountain, anywhere that has to staff people, a lot of the golf courses as well up here, and that drives a lot of tourism industry in our congressional district. H-2A and H-2B visas are very expensive, and the cost now to pay for those employees, I think it's over $18 now per hour for visa workers who are here. It's an extremely costly concern for people who use these immigrants that come in seasonally to work in areas in their hotels or in their fields in the agriculture. The other problem is it's very expensive for these business owners or these farmers to get these people to come. You have to pay for attorney's fees. You have to pay for their visas. You have to pay for their travel. You have to pay for their housing. Very, very expensive. And people use the argument all the time, well, you should be hiring local, or we shouldn't have these immigrants that come in. These businesses try to hire local. One, it's hard to get people here on temporary status to work because a lot of these jobs are seasonal. And in addition to that, people aren't specialized. A lot of the times when you're going out trying to get immigrants to work in these fields, whether it's a blueberry farm or it's at a hotel, you spend a lot of time training these people and get them up to speed. And it's hard for these companies or these farmers to get the same workers every single year because they've got to go through a process to try to get it. And again, it's very expensive and it's never guaranteed. So there are certain immigration reform or policies that we need to look at and we need to streamline for the people, especially in our congressional district. And that's one of the things for me. I'm concerned about what's going on in our congressional district first and foremost, because it impacts people, it impacts an industry that we need here to be sustainable long term. So we need to find ways to streamline that and make it more effective and simpler for companies and farmers to be able to utilize those services and make sure that they have some guarantees in that process. So our immigration policy directly correlated. As a border to Canada, obviously our relationships with Canada are a little bit strained at the moment. I mean, we talked about air quality before we got on the show. That's a concern for people. We're blaming Canada for that. But when you're looking at trade and other policies, Michigan uniquely has had, it's kind of like a little brother to us because we've utilized that in business for years, especially the automotive industry. But in the Sioux, where we have our own border crossing in our district, we get a lot of tourism from that. There's a lot of business-to-business things that happen over the border, but a lot of people come in at that border crossing throughout the year. And it's really important to Sioux and the other parts of the Upper Peninsula to have that tourism and the people coming from Canada to spend money at our businesses. And so those relationship agreements, the immigration issues that we may have or the trade issues that we're having with Canada, it is impacting in a negative way our district in particular. And we've got to find ways at the national level to have better relationships with our bordering countries, and in this case, Canada, because it does impact our communities and it does put money into our economy. And we've got to focus on ways to continue to grow and build that and not deter people from Canada to come to our district and spend the money that they have.
When it comes to Second Amendment issues, do you think we're good with where we are with regulations in terms of firearms, or do you think there are changes that need to be made at the federal level?
Well, as someone who's a NRA certified instructor. I've spent years of my life giving people the knowledge and training that they need to be effective and confident and comfortable with firearms. The Second Amendment, to me, I live it. I don't just say I'm a 2A guy. Like, I've lived it. And I've lived it throughout our district. I've trained probably 1,000 people to get their concealed pistol licenses, probably the same amount in how to be much more proficient with firearms. When it comes to federal regulations on firearms, I think there are some laws that don't make sense. And there are also groups that are pushing to make laws more stringent. As someone who looks at shall not be infringed as shall not be infringed, it seems like an absolute. I think the government oversteps in a lot of areas when it comes to firearms regulations. Obviously, you want to protect children. You don't want to have mass shootings. You don't want people who shouldn't have firearms to have firearms. But when it's your constitutional right to be able to defend and protect yourself and protect your home and protect your family, certain laws and regulations hinder that. And then you have other ones that don't make any sense. People talk about the ATF all the time. The ATF has regulations that seemingly impede on our Second Amendment rights. And we're getting to a point now where people are saying, well, regulated militia, we don't have the firearms to defend ourselves against the federal government. It's not like you can go to your local hardware store that sells firearms and buy a howitzer or a mortar or a tank or an F-22 Raptor and be like, well, I got my weapons for the week. You know, most of the firearms that are being sold to civilians right now are sporting weapons. They're handguns, they're AR-15s, and everyone says, oh, high-capacity magazines. They go after what they consider to be assault weapons. At this point, the average, everyday civilian living within the United States doesn't have the firepower to go up against the United States government in a tyrannical situation. So the argument that, you know, we're arming people in America and, you know, these are military-style weapons, I think it's kind of a moot point. The military is moving in a direction right now where I don't know that our military-style weapons, and I put that in, you know, quotations or parentheses, but military-style weapons would be even effective to defend our sovereignty as a nation. So I think that argument has pretty much been muted. The issue that we're having now is people want to be able to defend themselves, and they want to do that in a way that's safe and effective, and they want to be able to have the right to go out and get things like accessories, like suppressors and other things, to be able to enjoy the sports that they enjoy while using firearms. And I think that some of the regulations that we have at the federal level are impeding that, and that's a problem because, again, you have your First Amendment rights, and our founding fathers were like, the next one that's most important is your ability to defend those rights. And we need to make sure that the regulations that we have in place are constitutionally sound. And I don't believe that we should be forcing people to have to file continuous lawsuits to take it up to the Supreme Court to get those rulings in effect. I think it's something that legislators need to look at and need to rein in on. And that's something that I care about deeply in my heart, and it's something that I want to look into because I don't think we're doing enough as legislators, especially at the congressional level, to focus on those. We have a lot of people who are special interest groups that are pumping money in to stop certain issues or to push certain agendas. That needs to stop. We need to go back to our constitutional strengths and say, what does this mean? It's defined. Let's make regulation that fits those realms, and let's make sure we're doing that in a safe way for people that live in this country. On both sides, the people who are pro-gun and the people who are not.
Justin, where can people go to connect with you and learn more about your campaign?
They can go to my website, www.justinmichalforcongress.com. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Justin Michal for Congress. You can call me directly on my cell phone if you want to and have a discussion, 989-889-4333. Or you can email me at justin@justinmichalforcongress.com. I'm pretty accessible. I consider myself to be open, willing to talk to anybody, have any discussion that people want to have, as long as people are respectful. I think it's really important. Dialogue is the most important thing in any form of government. And if I'm going to represent people, then I want people to know that they can call me and have a conversation if they have issues, concerns, gripes, grievances, or solutions to the problems that we're facing currently in Michigan's 1st District.
We're speaking with Justin Michal, Republican candidate for Michigan's 1st congressional seat. Justin, thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. God bless.